Today I'm going to look at a capsule game from Task Force Games, Spellbinder from 1980. Art is consistent with the time and I think evokes the theme pretty well. Basically showing couple wizards, their tower, and then various unruly hordes. Cover art is fine. A little bit of theme on the back. Yoff Pintry shall be mine. It had been 2 long years since the chief wizard Yamanstar had left to conquer other lands. During this time, not one word of the whereabouts of Yamanstar had come back to Selmont. That's this land. The other wizards didn't know if Yamanstar was still even alive. The 4 principal wizards remaining, Darman, Sharn, Elgana, and Umaran, all were becoming restless. As they gazed out from their castles towards Yoff Pintry, the immense island stronghold of Yamanstar, their greed for power began to take hold on them. In his mind, each determined it was time to become the new chief wizard. Spellbinder's fantasy game of wizards and armies for 2 to 4 players. Players will use spells and make or break alliances as each attempts to become the most powerful wizard in Selmont and lay claim to Yoff Pintry, the pinnacle. It's got 3 scenarios, a campaign game, plays a couple hours, moderate, designer, Arvan Spark. Alright, its components. Of course, it's a capsule game, so it's like 8 inches by 5 1/4 inches. Book has 12 pages of rules. We'll go over those in detail. Black and white. It doesn't come with a dice. I was using a dice from another Task Force game I have. Use 1 dice. And then 4 sheets of these player aids. The for each Spellbinder, each of the 4 wizards. You have a armor combat results table, a magic combat results table, offensive defensive spell kind of tracker, and then Spellbinder points. Each of the 4 players has a wizard, shown by the name here. And then these are the armies that go with the wizard, color coded of course, so 9 with each. These are 4 other armies that are used in different scenarios. A couple boats. And then for each of the 4 there's a spell tracker and a Spellbinder tracker, so kind of simple and basic components. Here's the map. I'm actually very happy with the map. It's very, very well done. A lot of nice detail. Really gives you the flavor. Some good definition. Of course, these are the 4 fortresses of the 4 competing players. Here's Yoff Pintry of the Master Wizard, who has not reappeared in a couple years. And then there's clear areas. There's different terrain effects, roads and bridges, water course, forests, mountains, and the scale is each hex is 500 yards. So look at the rules, see how it plays out. So going through the rules here. Goes in turns, where each player goes in turn moving and doing combat. Each turn you randomly see who's going first, and it goes clockwise. Sequence outline. Each player turns in the following steps: movement phase, combat phase, which includes magical combat and regular combat. First player phase. Movement phase. Phasing player may move all, some, or none of his units within the restrictions and movement rules. Combat phase. Combat phase is broken down 2 types: combat, which is done in the following order: magical combat. If the phasing player has his wizard within 2 hexes of unfriendly armies or adjacent to an unfriendly wizard, and if he has Spellbinder points remaining, he may make a magical attack on that unfriendly army or wizard. The non-phasing player being attacked may be able to throw a defensive spell if his wizard is within 2 hexes of his armies which are being attacked. Regular combat. If the phasing player has an army adjacent to an unfriendly army or armies, he may make an attack using the rules of regular combat. After the first player has completed his turn, the second player becomes a phasing player and executes the above process. After each player has been the phasing player, one game turn has passed. Movement. During the movement phase, the phasing player may move as many or as few armies as he wishes, subject to movement allowance restrictions and terrain. They may be moved one at a time or in stacks, tracing a path of contiguous hexes so you can't jump hexes. As the unit enters each hex, it must pay a portion of its movement allowance for entering the hex. The cost of its movement allowance is in the terrain effects chart. Each army has a basic movement allowance of 5 hexes per turn. Each wizard has a basic movement allowance of 8 hexes per turn. Each ship has a movement allowance of 10 hexes per turn. Restrictions against movement. Anytime an army or wizard moves adjacent to an army of another player during the movement phase, the moving army or wizard must cease movement for the remainder of that turn. However, a unit does not have to cease movement when it moves adjacent to a wizard that is alone in a hex, with the exception of alliances. A wizard would have to stop if he moved adjacent to another wizard, whether or not the enemy wizard was alone in the hex, or whether or not the moving wizard was moving in a stack with some of his armies. A player may never move any units into or through a hex containing any enemy units, exception alliances. The only time a player may move his units is in the movement phase when he's a phasing player. Whenever a wizard, ship, or army has used its entire allowance, it must cease movement. Terrain effects charts, so the different types of terrain shown up here. Clear is 1 movement point cost. Road bridge is half. Water is only passable by a bridge or ship. Forest is 2. Mountain hill is 3. Castles are 2. Road movement. Units moving along roads may take advantage of the road movement rate only if they are moving from road hex to another road hex. Bridges are considered to be road hexes if they are entered from a road hex. Strongholds may only be entered along a road. Units may not cross castle wall hexes except by a road hex site. Exception scaling. Scaling. Any of the strongholds may be entered from non-road hex by scaling the walls. Procedure. If a player wishes to have his units scale the walls, he must stop the unit that will attempt to scale adjacent walls of the stronghold. On player's next turn, these units may not move or attack in the combat phase. On the second turn following, the player must roll to see if the attempt to scale has been successful. On a roll of 1 to 4, the attempt is successful. The player may place the scaling units in adjacent stronghold hex. So, up the wall and into the stronghold. If the attack was unsuccessful, the player may roll on each successive turn until he is either successful or abandons the attempt to scale the walls. If the die roll for the scaling attempt was 1, the attempt was successful, but the units involved has possibly suffered some casualties. To determine the number of casualties, roll 1 die and subtract 2. The result will yield the number of casualties scored against that player's. If the result is less than 0, consider it to be 0. The player may not end a successful scaling attempt in a hex containing any unfriendly wizards or armies. Obviously, there is no point in rolling for a scaling attempt if the only hex adjacent to scaling are occupied by unfriendly wizards or armies. If at the end of the successful scaling attempt the player has moved units adjacent to enemy units, he may attack them in a subsequent combat phase. Movement by ship. There are 2 ships in the game. Start a game. These ships should be placed hexes 817 to 714. Ships may only be moved in 1 or hexes of the lakes surrounding Yoff Pintry. So up here. Maximum of 2 army units may be transported by ship at a time, 1 or more if allied. Wizards may also be transported in addition to or instead of army units. The ship may either load or unload units to give them a turn. It may combine either activity with its normal movement. However, all movement must be done either before or after any loading or unloading activities. It may not load and unload units during a single turn, either different or same units. Once unloaded from the ship, units may make their ground movement immediately. However, if units moved by ground on the turn they boarded, they may only move by ship, but may not unload on the same turn. Once unloaded, a ship may be returned empty to dock on the opposite shore by the controlling player using normal movement rules. The controlling player did not have to have units on the ship to retain control of it. If there are other units to be transported, they may load, but may not move on the turn the empty ship returns. Units on a moving ship may only be attacked by armies or wizards on another adjacent ship. Units on a docked ship may not be attacked until the third consecutive turn they have remained in the dock hex without moving. Once the player has used a ship, he controls that ship until control is taken from him. During his movement phase, he may move any ships he controls anywhere on the lake in accordance with the rules of the movement of ships. An empty ship may be captured by moving an army or wizard onto the ship. On the land side of the lake, the ship may only be loaded or unloaded from hexes 1718 or 2715. These two hexes are known as dock hexes. And the island side players may unload or load from any island hex adjacent to the ship. The player may attempt to gain control of an enemy empty ship by challenging the wizard of the player who is currently controlling the empty ship. This can only take place during a player's magical combat phase. Procedure: in his movement phase, the player attempting to gain control must move his wizard adjacent to the wizard, the controlling player. Both players roll one die. If the challenging player rolled a higher number, he now has control of the ship and may immediately move it where he desires. If the challenging player's rolls lower, the other player retains possession of the ship. If the rolls are equal, players must re-roll until the rolls are equal. That's kind of simple. The player who made the challenge must, even if he loses the challenge, subtract the number rolled as die roll from his wizard's Spellbinder points. Okay. So there's some consequences to that. A player may only make one challenge per turn. Stacking: a maximum of 2 friendly armies may be stacked together in any hex at the end of the movement phase. Note that this does not include wizards, which may be freely added to any stack. Stacking limit is only in effect at the end of the moving player's movement phase. Combat: magical combat may take place in the magical combat portion of the player's phase. His wizard is within 2 hexes of any unfriendly armies or adjacent to unfriendly wizards. Magical combat versus armies. At the start of the game, each player has a number of Spellbinder points. 25, unless specified differently in the scenario. These points are used in the casting of various spells. To use a spell, a wizard must have at least 1 Spellbinder point remaining. The casting of spells requires the expenditure of Spellbinder points. Also, as an adverse effect of combat, wizard may lose Spellbinder points. One spell allows the wizard to replenish his Spellbinder points. A wizard may use only 1 offensive spell per turn, and it may be used only in the owning player's turn. A wizard may use a defensive spell once in each opposing player's turn. Defensive spells: if the player's army is attacked by magic and his wizard is within 2 hexes of the army being attacked and has Spellbinder points, he has the option of casting a defensive spell. Known as a result of attacking an enemy army, when non-physing player or wizard is casting a defensive spell, an attacking wizard may suffer damage, additional loss of Spellbinder points, if the defensive spell is more powerful than his offensive spell. However, a wizard who is defending his army by casting a defensive spell can never personally suffer an adverse combat result, loss of additional Spellbinder points. Only when a wizard is attacked directly can he suffer combat damage, loss of Spellbinder points, when he is the defender, non-phasing wizard in combat. Procedure for magical combat: if a player is using an offensive spell and a player owning the armies under attack is not using a defensive spell, the spell will take effect immediately. If an offensive and defensive spell are being used, players choose their spells simultaneously and secretly. After selecting, each player reveals to the other the spell he has chosen. 6 offensive and 6 defensive spells are listed on the magical combat matrix, shown here. Defensive: force of unmurad, stillness of barrow waste, armor, shield, fear of battle, force crusher. Offensive: mind, Thunder, Hammer, Sword, Regeneration, Spellbinder. The phasing player may choose one of the 6 offensive spells, and non-phasing player one of the 6 defensive spells. Even if able to cast a defensive spell, the non-phasing player is not required to do so. He may choose to cast no spell. There may be advantages in doing this, since it may encourage the phasing player to use more Spellbinder points than would otherwise be necessary. The players should then place their spell counter on the corresponding box on the spell track. Using no spell, you'd place it on the 0. Players must now decide how many Spellbinder points they wish to put in a spell, up to a maximum of 10. The amount of these points put in a spell will affect how well the spell works. If a player chooses to use a spell, he must put at least 1 Spellbinder point into the spell. However, if he does not choose to use a spell, he does not use any points. Players should write on a scratch paper the amount of Spellbinder points they have put into a spell, as this will be used to determine the number of casualties. Players then subtract from their Spellbinder point track the number of Spellbinder points here, which they put in a spell by moving the Spellbinder point counter down the Spellbinder point track. To determine the effects of combat, players should both locate the number of the spell points, the number of the spell, if they use a magical combat matrix here. Players should then cost in its spell numbers. The resulting box will be 1, 2, 3, NE, or S. If a number is in the box, this is the base number of casualties the phasing player has inflicted. This number may then be modified to indicate either more or less casualties by subtracting from the player found on the matrix the number of Spellbinder points the defender, non-phasing player, put into his spell, and then adding the number of Spellbinder points the attacker, phasing player, put into his spell. If the final result is a positive number, this is the number of casualties scored on the armies under attack. If the number is a negative number, it indicates the number of Spellbinder points subtracted from the attacking wizard. The damage to his power resulting from a backfired spell. If the result of 2 spells is any effect, this means that the spell does not work and nothing further takes place. After players remove the appropriate number of Spellbinder points, the last 2 offensive spells will always be successful unless one particular defense is used against them. In this case, the spell would have no effect. In any case, the Spellbinder points one player uses will not be subtracted from those the other player uses. Offensive spells 5 and 6 cost a fixed number of Spellbinder points, 5, and defensive spells 5 and 6 cost a fixed number of Spellbinder points, 2. If the non-phasing player did not use a spell, the base number of casualties will always be 3. To this number will be added the number of Spellbinder points which the phasing player put in a spell. Wizard versus wizard combat. Wizards may attack each other directly, with combat results being applied to each other by reducing the Spellbinder points. The procedure is the same as outlined previously. In order for 2 wizards to engage in magical combat, 2 wizards must be in adjacent hexes during the magical combat segment. The phasing player must announce whether he is attacking an army or a wizard, if both are available, for making the attack. Casualties scored against a wizard is subtracted from that wizard's Spellbinder point total. Regular combat. Regular combat takes place between 2 armies. Regular combat takes place between armies in the regular combat segment of each player phase. In order for a player to engage his armies in combat, the armies of another, he must have his attacking armies adjacent to the armies he wishes to attack. The phasing player is always the attacker, non-phasing is the defender. Combat is never mandatory. A player does not have to attack another player's armies simply because his army is adjacent to them. To determine the results of combat, players must first determine a differential. To do this, the phasing player has to have the current strength of all his armies attacking a single hex. The non-phasing player then determines the current strength of the armies in the hex being attacked. Current strength of the defender is then subtracted from that of the attacker. Even if this results in a negative number, this is the differential. So, Up here is a combat table and this is a differential. Players must then locate the proper column of the combat results table. A player may not attack at a differential less than -3. The attacking player then makes any terrain adjustments applicable and rolls one die. This will yield a result on the combat results table. On the combat results table, we found the largest numbers. The number is the number of strength points subtracted from the infected units. If there's an A, the attacking player or facing player loses strength points. If there's a D, the defending player loses strength points. Any means no effect. No army may attack more than once in a turn. An army may be attacked once by magical combat and once by regular combat during a single player phase. Note 4 players are involved in some scenarios. Between given player's current turn and next turn, all 3 of the other players will have the opportunity to attack his armies by regular magical combat. An army in a particularly critical position might be attacked as many as 6 times, 3 times by regular and 3 times by magical combat. Combat results table. Certain terrain features will aid the defender and result in modification in the die roll. Mountains and castles subtract 1 from the die roll, and a forest will subtract 2 from the die roll. How to record casualties? Each of a player's armies will have a certain number of strength points, usually 10, specified in the scenario being played. A army counter typically represents like 1,000 troops, they say. So this is the relative effect on those. Beginning of the game, each player should write the letters A through I on a sheet of scratch paper and list the initial strength of each army next to the appropriate letter. Each time the army takes casualties, the player must mark this beside the appropriate army, reducing the strength by the number of casualties. When the strength of the army is reached 0, the army is removed from the game. If casualties are scored in hex where 2 armies are stacked together, the owning player may subtract casualties from the strength record of either or both armies, as long as the total casualties is equal to the number of zone combat. The number of casualties scored in hex is limited to the number of strength points of the armies in the hex. If more casualties are scored against an army or 2 armies hex, then the armies have strength points, the armies are eliminated, and no further casualties are scored. Players may combine armies as long as there is never more than 10 points, or the maximum number specified in the scenario, in one army. To do so, the armies must be moved to the same hex. Wizards take damage by losing Spellbinder points. Wizards may regain 1 Spellbinder point, up to a maximum of 25, for each turn they remain in either their own stronghold or Yav Pintri without using any Spellbinder points. Wizard recovery: if a wizard's Spellbinder point total is reduced to 0, to exactly 0, must immediately return to its castle. This is not done by regular movement. Simply remove the wizard and place him in the castle. All of his armies outside of the castle are removed from play temporarily. Once he regains 5 Spellbinder points, the temporarily eliminated armies are placed anywhere in his castle, with their strength levels the same as the instance they removed. If his home castle contains unfriendly wizards and no friendly or allied wizards, when he is forced to return to it, he's permanently eliminated from the game. Wizard elimination: if wizard's Spellbinder points are reduced to less than 0, he and all of his armies are removed permanently from the game. So previously used for exactly 0, and this is for if greater than 0. Spells and their effects: there are 4 offensive spells, which have varying effect depending on the defensive spell chosen. There are 4 defensive spells that will have varying effect. And the first 4 offensive spells, the offensive spells are Ring of Shand, Mind, causes enemies to kill one another through mind control. Invocation of Thunder, calling upon forces of nature to destroy enemies. Hammer of Goron Troll, the warhammer of the famous troll, given the power of flight. Sword of Korth, a famous sword given the power of flight. The defensive spells are Force of Umran, developed by Umran to block out mind control. Stillness of Barrow Waste, stills the violent forces of nature. Armor of Dismoth, the only spell to stop the hammer spell. Shield of Death Stay. Actual small shields would cover all warriors. The fifth offensive spell is a regeneration spell. This spell, when successful, will bring back up to 10 army strength points. These strength points will appear immediately, hex with a wizard that casts a spell. They may be added to the armies in that hex, or used to create a new army if the counter is available. This spell cannot be used to regenerate more strength points than a player originally had, and cannot be used to generate more than 10 strength points per turn, even if some of the player's armies had more than 10 strength points to begin with. The cost of the spell is 5. The defensive Fear of Battle spell is the only spell which can stop the regeneration spell. The cost of the spell is always 2. The sixth offensive spell is the Spellbinder spell. The spell may only be used by each wizard successfully once per game. However, the only limit to the number of times a player may fail and keep trying is that the player must have at least 5 Spellbinder points left to try it. If the spell is successful, it immediately moves the Spellbinder point total back to 25. The cost is always 5. The only spell which will stop the Spellbinder spell is the Force Crusher spell, which always costs 2 points. The regeneration and Spellbinder spells must always be cast on another wizard or on an army other than the player's own. Note that allies can cast these spells on one another, but cannot always be trusted. Alliances. The optimum number of players for Spellbinder is 4, although alliances can become interesting in a 3-player game as well. Alliances are encouraged, and within the framework of the rules, almost any deals may be made. However, alliances may be broken at any time, and often with disastrous results. With the permission of an ally, a player may ignore the zones of control. Players may still move in their own movement phase. A player may not move an ally's armies, and an ally may not move in the player's armies. A player who controls a ship may loan a ship or turn over control of it to his ally. Armies belonging to different players may not stack together. However, allied wizards may stack together. A player who allows another player any one of the privileges of alliances is said to be allied with or acting in alliance with that player. Conversely, if a player accepts such privileges, it's also considered to be an ally of the first player. And then there's the scenarios. I'll do the each of his own scenario. There are 3 scenarios plus campaign. Game including Spellbinder, although Spellbinder is basically a 4-player game. Provisions will be made in scenarios for 2 or 3 players. Each scenario will include background, starting positions, strengths of armies, any special rules, number of game turns, victory conditions. And then I'll discuss that each of his own in detail. The 4 wizards, Naval, Sham, during Lumran, all decide to take possession of Yoff Petrie. Each wizard begins the game anywhere inside his castle. Early arrival. One of the wizards has made a move early, surprising the garrison Yoff Petrie left behind and capturing Yoff Petrie. At the start of the game, the players roll the die. The player with the highest roll may choose whichever wizard he desires and play his units in Yoff Petrie. The other players will deploy as in previous. Third scenario is return to Yamansar. Yamansar is returned and found the other wizards trying to take over Yoff Petrie. They will soon feel his full fury. One is Yamansar. Campaign game. Campaign game is essentially a series of the first scenario. Start each scenario where they left and then continue. And then players' notes and designers' notes about various strategies and background. I'm doing the scenario each on his own, shown here. The 4 wizards, Darman, Sham, Elgana, and Elmran, all decide to take possession of Yoff Petrie. Each wizard begins the game anywhere inside his castle. Darman, Castle Elsmore, Elgana, Castle Coving, Umran, Armature, Sham, Pentegraph. And then so the armies are in there as well. And then as far as the stacking, in Pentegraph you have to put 3 armies instead of 2 initially, but that's the initial state. And then to track the strength of the armies, I'm just going to use scrap paper here, and then for they each start with 10. I also have the garrisons that start 20, and then I'll track the spell points there as well. And then since there's 4 character aids, I'm having them go by the corresponding, so this would be green, blue, orange, and yellow, the spells and spellbinders. So all armies start with 10 strength points each. If there are 2 players, which I'm going to do, each player may choose 2 wizards and 2 armies controlled by those wizards. However, 1 player may not control both ships. So I'm going to have blue and orange against green and yellow. There are 3 players. A garrison of 4 armies of the wizard not used are placed in the wizard's castle. If a player comes adjacent to these armies, the unknown armies immediately attack. However, the garrison will never attack at a negative differential. The black garrison armies are placed in hexes 1911, 1910, 1811, and 1912 of infantry. These armies are presumed to be guards. Centaur left behind, and each army contains 20 strength points. They are used as in B above, as is described in the 3-player situation. Anytime a player has no armies in his home castle, and a non-allied player enters armies into that castle, the player entering the castle is said to have occupied it. The player who has had his castle occupied immediately loses 10 Spellbinder points from his wizard, and the player who occupied the castle immediately gains 5 Spellbinder points for his wizard. The game lasts 20 turns. Victory conditions. The player with the most victory points at the end of 20 turns is the winner. Victory points are awarded as follows. Each player receives 25 points for each stronghold in which he has at least 1 army at the end of the game. Each player receives 10 points for having at least 1 army in hexes 1718, 2715, or 1804 at the end of the game. So these ports in the bridge. Each player receives 50 points for having at least 1 army in infantry at the end of the game. A player may receive 80 points for being in sole possession of infantry at the end of the game. Must be the only player with at least 1 army there. This does not count any garrison troops which happen to be in infantry at the end of the game. And the ships are in their ports. Then we'll get into play. So I'll start with the first movement here. And the plan is so blue and yellow. Again, it's blue and orange versus yellow and green. So blue and yellow both have a road that goes to a port. And so they'll be going up here, and that way they can not only go to the island, but they can kind of go around to different spots. And then green and orange are going to kind of go after each other. Nobody's really planning on attacking the main fortress until they kind of knock each other down, I guess. So Roland Blue goes first. So he'll take his wizard and a couple armies and go. It's 2 for moving in the castle and then half on the road. So 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, and movement allowance of armies is 5. So, and clockwise, again, he's got a road 2. He's gonna keep his wizard in the castle for now to protect it. But these armies will go out. Half 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5. 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 5. You'll just smooth these up. 2, 3, 4. That's kind of what he'll do. Kind of send him over to orange there. Then orange, he's gonna send his wizard with the armies. First of all, he'll send these out. 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5. Then he'll send his wizard out with 2 armies. 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5. With these guys, they had 3 stacked here, but he'll keep 2 to stack. keep them there. Then finally yellow. They're going to go for about 2. 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5. He'll send another army of 2. 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4. You can't end up on there though, so I'll stay here because of stacking limits. Move these guys up. So on turn 4 here. What's happened so far is they've been moving the armies out. Blue has a ship, yellow has a ship. They're loaded on it. Blue decided, and they both have their wizards with some armies. Blue decided to send some armies up here across the clear area to green. And then green decided to send their wizard out to catch up with these armies here. Because orange, so they sent a wizard with their army, and they ended up doing mind, and they didn't have a wizard to protect them, so they lost 6 forces there because it's a base loss of 3 without a defense, and then he's 3 Spellbinder points to knock down. And then orange had some advantage on the troop count there, which is with the wizard, so they were able to knock down a couple more forces there. So the orange, they've reduced their Spellbinder points down to 22 then, and they're sending some across here to yellow. Yellow is sending some across to blue. And they've also boarded a ship here. So I've determined blue's going to go first here. So first of all, he'll move these up. He's got two armies here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He'll keep these here for defensive purposes. And now they're on their boat, and instead of going to the island, he's going to go to yellow. So 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then they'll get off the boat. And they can use their full movement allowance either before they load or after they unload. So, which is 5, because the wizard's going with the army. So 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5. So that's where they're going. Green is going to engage these forces here, but these armies are down a bit, so he's instead going to move these guys up here. 2. And then he'll have the wizard join them, and they have a movement of 8, so 1.5, 1, 1.5, 2. He'll join the forces there, so now they're more evenly matched. So there's an advantage of being in a forest or mountains for defensive purposes. The defender gets a 1-point bonus in their direction on the die roll for being the mountains, and 2 for being the forest. So they're going to get ready for these guys and come up in the forest here. And then they'll move this guy up here. And then there's combat. First we do the magical. He's going to be going against the armies there. So it's a little bit Should do the spells and secrets, but that's kind of difficult since I'm playing both sides. So first he chooses the spell and then the spellbinder points. His spell, he'll do Invocation of Thunder, calling upon the forces of nature to destroy enemies. And then he's going to do 5 spellbinder points on that. And then the defensive spell, so they don't know what they're doing, so to simulate that, I'm just going to randomly roll for what spell he's going to use on the defensive side. 1 is the Force of Umran. Was developed by Umran to block out mind control. So it's that's not going to be very helpful because that one is designed to go against the mind weapon. And he doesn't know, so he's gonna do 3 points. Indicate where he's gonna go and take him off after. First of all, we determine the effect of that spell. He's doing Thunder versus Force of Umran, and the result is 1 casualty. And then you modify that based on the spellbinder points. He used 5 and the defender used 3. So it's +2 for him. So it's the 1 casualty +2. So 3 casualties then on orange. Orange gets to decide which of the troops they go on. We'll just put them on A and reduce their count by 3. And then they both lost those spellbinder points. So it reduces as well. And then regular combat. Green has 2 armies under there, each at full strength. And now orange has 2 armies, but one is reduced by 3 strength, so it's 20 against 17. So the difference is +3. And one thing a little bit unusual about this, usually these are like ratios instead of the number difference by subtraction, but here's that. So since the difference is 3, you go in this column, and then you roll 6. Defender loses 2 armies. Then you mark those down here. Defender can decide where they go. You'll just have them all go on A. So that's that combat. Then orange can go. He's going to engage both his armies. Actually, so he's going to go wizard on wizard. So he's going to do a wizard battle instead of attacking the troops. And he's going to do the Hammer of Goran Troll, which is 3. He'll do 3 more spellbinder points on that. And the defender, I'll just randomly determine what he's going to do. I'll randomly choose from 1 to 4 because the others are regeneration and spellbinder. 2. That'd be Stillness of Barrow Waste. Stills the violent forces of nature. And then we look at the table to see for casualties. And these casualties then will affect the spellbinder points that they have. So it's 3 versus 2. So 3 casualties. And then you look at the spellbinder differential. The defender is using 3 spellbinder points also. So the differential there is 0. So it'd be 3 casualties, which show up as lost spellbinder points. So the result is the defender lost 3. So this is the amount of spell points he took, and then he took another 3 damage. And then also track the spellbinder points, the attacker. And then regular combat. So he's got 2 forces going against 1 there. Unfortunately, he can't attack an individual army in the hex. He's got to attack everything in the hex. And there's 2 armies. And his combat strength is a total of 15 on A and B because he had taken 5 casualties. So it'd be a 15 against 20, which is a -5. And you can't attack if you're less than a -3, so we can't attack with that one. But this one's at full strength, so it's full strength against full strength, so it's differential 0. This is 6. So the defender loses 1 army. And the defender can choose which one. And then he'll also keep moving his armies towards yellow, so. And finally yellow. So they got this force coming down here, which they want to meet. So they're gonna get off the boat, and then they have their full movement. It's 2 in the city, so 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5. He can't quite get there with the army, but he can go further with his wizard. And he'll go down here to be able to do combat. And they'll keep, and then he'll move his towards he'll try to get these guys close too. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can't quite get within 1. And then he'll actually do wizard to army combat, and he'll be doing the Sword of Korth, which is number 4. And again, we'll randomly determine what the defender's doing. He's doing shield. And they look at Spellbinder points. They both have a lot of Spellbinder points. He's gonna put 5 into it. He'll put he'll put 4 into it. And then we look at the result. So number 4 sword versus number 4 shield is no effect. So nothing happens there, but they both lose their Spellbinder points. So that's Spellbinder from Task Force Games from 1980. It's one of their pocket games. I found it had a lot going for it. The components are simple. I mean, I like the map a lot. The map's very well done. The counters, there's a small number of counters, and they're pretty simple, so they're not, a huge selling point. The player aids are useful, so they're functional, so it's fine. The main thing I like it is of course, it combines magic and regular combat. And you have three good scenarios. You have a neat kind of setting here, different terrain effects for movement and combat. Got different, you look at the combinations of the spell you can use on whether it's wizards. And you can go wizard versus wizard or wizard versus troops. I mean, you have to do a little bit of bookkeeping, but it's not bad. And I get why they do that, because in bigger games you'd probably actually have numbered counters that you'd reduce, but you'd have to have a fair number of counters to do that, and it doesn't make sense. It's not practical in a small game to do that, so bookkeeping's pretty easy. It's fine. So it's unique in that, like I said, it combines magic and combat. A lot of different strategies you can do. You have different terrain to look at. You can go on ships. Should you get the ships? Should you go against the different forts, or should you attack the main one? A lot of different variations there. I imagine it's probably a lot of replayability. When you do multiplayer, a big selling point is probably doing alliances, and obviously I wasn't able to do an alliance with myself, so I'm sure that adds to the play as well. I enjoyed it. I'll give it a 7. Thanks a lot. Spellbinder by Task Force Games, 1980.